If you get debanked, then you have been completely ostracized from modern society.
The cult of climate change has had no pushback, so they've come up with crazy ideas that depend on the public having no choice.
Part of the team bringing you coverage from the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship. Well, welcome once again to a slightly different episode of the Aussie Wire. Today I have the absolute pleasure and privilege of starting the episode by introducing you to 75% of the team that is going to be covering the launch of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship over in London late in October and very early November. It's a project that we are incredibly honoured to be a part of, something we're very excited to do. And I want to take this opportunity to introduce most of the team who have flown from all over the country, and I'll tell you why this chair is empty in just a minute. Carly, you're well known to most Aussie Wire viewers and certainly well known to anyone that's been following me for a long time. However, we are picking up new viewers all the time. So would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what it is that you do, and a little bit about why you said yes to flying halfway around the world and covering the ARC launch?
Oh, okay. So
just small questions,
small
nothing big, nothing serious.
I'm about to have an existential crisis. My name's Carly. I am colloquially known as Carlz J. Soda. I'm a commercial photographer and most infamously known for a little video that went viral in lockdown and reached 40 million views. My biggest, I guess, reason to join you on this is that I am someone that feels very disenfranchised with what's going on culturally. I am someone that became particularly politically involved during the lockdowns. But aside from that, I am someone who is a massive history nerd and a well-travelled soul. And when I sort of am looking at the broad overview of what's going and transpiring at the moment, I want to be somewhat involved or do whatever I can to sort of, you know, create this counterculture against what's happening. And you know, having seen ARC, having, you know, been a very big fan of Jordan Peterson for a very long time, it's something that I just feel intuitively is going to be something that I feel at home in these people. I'm around thought leaders who have aligned with my own values. And I guess being over there and being able to showcase something like that, you know, it's very intellectual. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of highbrow, I guess, information. Being able to take that, digest it, and relay it back to my own following and people who are younger to get them more engaged in this sort of cultural shift.
I love how humble you are, because you say, I'm a commercial photographer. You just sort of, you leave it at, I've been a big fan of Jordan Peterson. No. Carlz J. Soda photographed Jordan Peterson and created the photograph that he now uses on all of his social media all over the world, and has said, by the way, on the record that it's his favourite photograph of him. That's the calibre that Carlz J. Soda works at in photography. You were also travelling, you said you were a well-travelled soul. You've just come back from Vietnam. And made me very, very jealous. So thank you for that. I really appreciate you just rubbing in the fact that I haven't travelled since 2018. Do you have some other sort of things you want to do on the side while you're in the UK? We're taking you to the UK, we're taking you to the conference. You're going to be providing amazing coverage of, no doubt. But hey, surely you're going to make the most of it and do something else while you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't been to Europe as an adult.
Okay.
So it's going to be really exciting to be back in the motherland. But also just seeing culturally what's going on in other Western countries at the moment. I spend a lot of my time in Asia, and it'd be really nice to see what other Westerners are doing, where they're at, what's unfolding. And obviously I want to tell the story of London photographically, and I have had on good authority that it's the right time to see the Northern Lights. So there might be a little to Iceland on.
Now you're making me jealous again. You haven't even been there yet. All right, look, I'm going to have to wrap up before I get too jealous of Carly. But Carly is an amazing photographer. If you don't, well, where can people find you if they don't follow you already?
My home on the internet is Instagram, so it's at Carlz J. Soda. That's kind of my little hangout. Well
worth giving Carly a follow. Now, turning my attention to my invisible friend here. This seat was meant to be occupied by someone you would never have heard of, I'm sure. He's not really well known in Australia. Rukshan, Fernando, you have heard of him. Okay, that's surprising. Rukshan, of course, made a name for himself, and rightly so, during the lockdowns here in Melbourne as the state went mad, and our Premier went mad, quite frankly. There's no nice way to say it. Locked down the state, there were huge protests as a result. And Rukshan was a wedding videographer, and still is. And he simply grabbed his gear and he hit the streets, and he just began to document and live stream and show the world what was happening on the streets of Melbourne. And he did a beautiful job of it. He's got a beautiful soul. He's just one of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet. And he has a talent for framing and for storytelling, and he just did a really great job of covering what very few other people were willing to cover, and the mainstream media certainly were doing a terrible job of. Rightly so, his following grew massively, and when I thought about the team that I wanted to assemble to join me as the anchor of the Aussie Wire News over in London to cover the launch of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, Rukshan was, no offence ladies, he was first on my list, I've got to be honest. But unfortunately, I'm not his first love, and he proved that to me by, instead of coming to the training, we've brought the team together from all over Australia. There's about another dozen people that you can't see on the camera that are part of the support team as well. He ditched me for Avi. So Avi, from the bottom of my heart, screw you. I will win. Next time I will win. Now Avi's actually launching his book. He's in New Zealand right now, and Rukshan is supporting that book launch. It's called A Rebel from the Start. I read the book, I did a review on it. I think it's actually a really great book, arebelfromthestart.com, if you want to catch up with what Avi's been writing and the story of his life. I actually found it really, really fascinating. So Rukshan, I'm jealous that you're not here right now. You're having fun in New Zealand with Avi instead, but you know what, good on you. And Rukshan is going to be an incredibly valuable member of this team, and he's going to be a part of the team bringing you coverage from the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship launch in October and November in London. And that brings us to Rebekah. Now, Rebekah, I don't want to rub it in, but
you're going to rub it in.
Where are you from?
From the Hermit Kingdom in Western Australia.
From Western Australia. So please don't read into the fact that I've seated you as far away as. I just thought you'd be more comfortable if you were just right on the extreme other side of the country.
Yeah,
just, you know.
I'm used to it.
Now, Rebekah is a journalist, a qualified journalist, and has a wonderful way of writing, and that was really what caught my attention when I came across Rebekah's work. The level of research, the level of cross-referencing, and the way that Rebekah is able to assemble complex ideas from disparate sources and weave them into a narrative that is both makes sense and I believe is also correct. Was very, very impressive. So I reached out to you, and you'd actually never met me. So my first question for you is, what possessed you to actually say yes to joining the Aussie Wire team and flying halfway around the world?
I really wanted to go to London.
Well, that makes sense, yes.
If I'm honest. Also, the ARC idea really fascinated me because I am a fan of JP as well. And I had heard him speak late last year, and something he said really struck me. He was talking about how people don't like what's happening in schools and in culture. And he said, well, where were you when the school board decided that, or when the parent and teacher committee made that decision? And his point was, if you're not taking part in the service team, you don't really have a say. And if you want to have a say, you've got to do service. You've got to join the council, you've got to show up to the meetings. And it's boring, but the people who do the boring stuff get to decide how the culture runs. And I really believe in that. And so when you told me about ARC, and you told me, and I read a bit about it and saw that Jordan Peterson was involved, and that it is about responsible citizenship. It's not just sitting at home having a whinge, this isn't how I like it. It's saying, well, here's what I'm going to do about it. That really sat well with me. So I wanted to be a part of that.
Well, as I say, the future is made by those who show up.
Yeah.
And it is often so boring. It's people, I don't want to do, I don't have time for that, I've got other things to do. Well, then someone else does it. And if you don't like what they do, then that's absolutely spot on. Now, you also like to travel a lot, and both of you make me jealous. You've done an awful lot more traveling than me in the last couple of years. Where have you just come back from?
I spent a month in Bali.
That sounds terrible.
It was so awful. You wouldn't have liked it.
Now, if I recall correctly, the day that I got in touch with you and said, "Hey, Rebekah, I want to offer you a spot on our team," that was the best thing that happened to you that day, of course. But there was something else that was second best to that.
The second best thing that happened that day was that my partner proposed and we got engaged. We hiked to the top of Mount Batur, which you have to get up at 2 in the morning. It takes a couple of hours to hike up. It's just vertical for hours. And then you get to the top just before the sun rises, and then the sun came up, and then he made me get a photo, and I was just not feeling it at 6 a.m. And he was like, no, you really need to get a photo. And then sure enough, as the sun came up, he got someone to do the video and did the one knee. And so, yeah, that was the second best thing that happened.
Yeah, obviously. Look, well, congratulations. And look, my philosophy on sunrise, if God wanted me to see the sunrise, he would have scheduled it for sometime later in the day. Like, it's just, he's just put it at the wrong part of the day.
I forgot to say I said yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I guess that's an important detail, isn't it? That is. Look, and it's great hearing both of your sort of reasons. Actually, sorry, before we go to that, how can people follow you and find your work online?
So I'm on Substack. It's Rebekah Barnett. If you Rebekah Barnett.
Just to be difficult.
On Substack, and then my socials are Dystopian Downunder.
We'll put the links to all of these in the description of the video. It's funny hearing both of you because it really resonates with what happened with me when I came across the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And for about 10 years now, in my handles and descriptions on social media, I've had this phrase, pro-human. And it's generated a lot of questions for me. A lot of people have asked me, what do you mean by pro? Of course, everyone's pro-human. What do you mean pro-human? You don't have to say you're pro-human. And I was sort of like, well, actually, these days you kind of do. There's actually a lot of people that have wrapped up some really anti-human ideologies into their politics. They don't necessarily recognize it as such, but I would argue that an awful lot of the environmental movement has actually morphed into anti-human sentiment, where simply hurting humans and hurting human progress and prosperity is good enough for them. They don't have to prove that it's good for the environment. If it's bad for humans, then that's good enough. And so I've had this phrase for a very long time, pro-human, pro-individualism and pro-freedom. Those have been my values as a political commentator since 2009. Can you believe 14 years already? And then along comes the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and their very first self-descriptor is pro-human. And I went, what? Someone else has just used this term. I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. So I researched, and of course I'm aware of the work of Jordan Peterson, of course, but there's many other incredible people that are also involved. This isn't just the JP show. There's so much more to this. He's kind of the headline act to get people's attention. But there's an incredible body of work being created by some really amazing people. And I thought, I want to be a part of this, but obviously I can't. Like, I'm here in Australia and I haven't been able to travel since 2018 because the world went mad and I don't have the money to fly to London, and oh well, what a shame I won't get to be there. And then the opportunity came up and we were invited by the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship to be the only invited Australian media that are going to be inside the conference. So we're inside security, we're not standing out the front, we're actually going to be able to be there and bring you coverage from inside the event. Every single session, every single guest, every single speaker, we will be bringing you the whole lot. And we put together an incredible team. We're so incredibly proud of what we've become in what is now only 4 months. We're only 4 months old, let's keep that in perspective. And when we walk into that conference, the Aussie Wire will only be 6 months old. And yet we will be right there at what I believe will be one of the most significant civilizational moments in this contest between the anti-human and the pro-human sort of sides of our civilization as we're seeing that emerge today. So I couldn't be prouder. I couldn't be more excited, and I wanted to start today's episode of the Aussie Wire News by introducing you to our team and whetting your appetite. I hope you're excited. Now, the ways that you can be a part of this is, number one, make sure that you're following us not just on one social media platform, but across all of our social media platforms, because we're going to have different people with different talents publishing across different platforms. Rebekah's going to be more on Twitter and our blog and our website, theaussiewire.com. Carly, you're going to be much more on Instagram and providing photographs for articles and blog posts as well. We've got Rukshan, of course, is going to be publishing to Facebook and myself to YouTube. So across our different channels, you're going to be getting complete coverage if you're following us across all of those channels. Now, naturally, you need to be following our blog and on our email list as well. So go to theaussiewire.com, make sure you sign up for our emails, because if we do get deplatformed by any one or potentially all of these social media platforms, we want to be able to continue to communicate with you. And finally, last but certainly not least, if you'd actually like to be a part of the team and be a part of making it possible for us to do this and to be able to pay the bills while we do this, then you can become an Aussie Wire insider. Now, insiders get exclusive content. There's going to be a lot of that sort of exclusive content that only insiders are going to get from the ARC conference and the ARC launch specifically. You also get our amazing insider community with like-minded other insiders. There's some fun debates that happen there, and some really fun stuff happens in there with the community itself. You also get discounts and giveaways. We've given away a bunch of free tickets. We're out of them now, unfortunately, but we gave a bunch of VIP tickets to the Donald Trump Jr. Events that are coming up here in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane in just another month or so's time. So we are constantly giving amazing value to our insiders. We'd love for you to join us. It's $8 a month. Apologies, it's US dollars. Yes, people do bring that up all the time. We can't control that on locals, unfortunately. So it's theaussiewire.locals.com/support. The link to do that will be in the description of this video as well. Well, I think that kind of brings us into today's episode of the news. So please say hello to the team, please go and follow them on social media, and please enjoy today's episode of the Aussie Wire News.
Well, no doubt in the last few weeks you've noticed a spate of articles demonising cash, or at the very least celebrating its disappearance. Apparently the number of bank notes in Australia in circulation is actually now in a fairly steady decline, something that we're supposed to feel good about according to the media, because apparently that's bad for criminals or something like that. Don't think about your own personal privacy, don't think about your own use of cash. Just be glad that we, the honest people, can tap and go and trust that we'll be completely looked after, and we're going to get rid of cash for those pesky criminals. Now, that, of course, happens in the context of a situation like what we're seeing in the UK, where Nigel Farage, the UKIP leader and responsible in a large degree for the success of the Brexit campaign, was debanked. According to his bank, initially they said it was for financial reasons. He no longer met their elite criteria to be one of their exclusive clients. That has since been proven to be a lie. So here we have a situation where there is a war on cash in the media, there is debanking happening to high-profile celebrities and people with the wrong political ideas. But don't get smug, because just because you may not be a high-profile celebrity doesn't mean you're safe. It seems as though the war on cash and the war on banking, or the use of banking as a weapon in the cultural war, may very well be coming for very much ordinary people. My next guest may take umbrage to being called an ordinary person. I'll find out in just a moment, but he has certainly experienced the reality of this problem for himself. Crispin Tovere joins me now, right now on the Aussie Wire. Crispin, I hope you don't mind being called an ordinary person, but I think it's fair to say that there was no
definitely am.
There was no particular reason why you would have experienced what you have. Now, for those who don't know the story, it's been all over Twitter. I've been following it now for a few weeks, but bring us up to speed for those who just have absolutely no idea who you are or what's happened to you.
Sure. Well, Topher, I am an absolutely ordinary person, much like everybody else. And in Melbourne, I went to deposit $2,000 cash into my own bank account at a Westpac ATM. Now, when I did so, all of my accounts were instantly frozen. I had to wait for a branch to go in to find out what was happening. And they told me that they needed to know where the money came from. And at first, when they asked me, I was like, well, out of my pocket, of course. Like, what kind of a question is that? And then it took a while for the penny to drop, because I thought, oh, this must be for my own protection. They're trying to protect me from fraud or scam. But they were trying to interrogate me as to where I was earning my own funds. And this was not a huge sum of money. This is way below the amount necessary for AUSTRAC or any kind of money laundering issues. And it wasn't until there was a significant media blow-up that it all got sorted out. Now, I thought the issue was over. I was, appalled by that intrusion. But then I came to Perth and went to withdraw that money from Perth. Went into a branch to take out the cash. And once again, my accounts were frozen. And they said, well, what do you need the money for? What are you going to use it for? Goodness. And then when I said, look, it's none of your business. We've been down this road before. This was by this stage, I wasn't just a nobody. Like everybody knew about this issue around the world. And yet they still froze my accounts. And then when I said, look, it's none of your business, they said, well, if you're not going to disclose to us what you need the money for, then we're not going to unfreeze your accounts. Thank you very much for contacting us. Goodbye. And if it wasn't for the extraordinary social media reach and people such as yourself sort of putting it out there, that would be the status today.
It's just extraordinary. Now, first of all, depositing money required an explanation as to where it came from. Now, I'm on board this idea of people using cash. There is a campaign going for people to use cash and to try and increase its usage in Australian society, specifically to push back against the loss of cash and the loss of privacy that comes with that. I'm not necessarily great at being in that campaign. I really like the convenience of tap and go, and literally more than half the time, I just don't have any cash on me, and so I just end up paying with a card anyway. But where I can, I do like to use cash. But here's where it gets thorny for me. When I go on a speaking engagement, I go and speak somewhere on stage or at an event or something like that, I'll have some DVDs or some T-shirts or something like that to sell to those that want to buy them, and it helps to cover the costs of flying out there and the time that I spend. So I end up with some cash. The thing for me is, in order for me to track that from a tax point of view, the easiest thing for me to do is to deposit that into the bank. So now I've got it in numbers, and when it comes to reconciling tax at the end of the quarter and at the end of the financial year, it's all there. I actually choose to put cash into the bank. But if I'm now going to be interrogated as to the source of my own money, and then penalised when I try and take it back out again to use it as cash what kind of a rabbit hole have we gone down? Do you have any understanding, any insight as to the genuine motive for why they're doing this? They're saying this is for your protection, or for what?
Well, I think you hinted at the beginning of what you just said when you said, look, you tap and go because it's convenient. Well, we don't trade privacy for security much, but we do trade privacy for convenience. And what's happening is, now that the overwhelming majority of financial transactions are digital, and banks can sell that information in a de-identified format, hopefully, put it into big data algorithms, they can they know everything about us. They know where you are, what you spend your money on, what you're doing at any particular time. They can aggregate that across the entire population and use that information to make a huge sum of money. Meanwhile, they can stigmatize anything that doesn't fit into that system. So if you're using cash, well, only criminals would use cash, right? I mean, you tap and go. Everyone is, for convenience sake, surrendering that privacy. And in fact, the very idea of privacy as being something that is valuable, something that you want to preserve, itself is being marginalized, itself is being stigmatized. The classic, if you've got nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to worry about. Well, that goes against the whole notion of our individual sovereignty, our individual right to do with our own property, including money, as we will.
Well, the very governments that say if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear, they're still the ones, in America's case in particular, chasing the likes of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. If they had nothing to hide, then they had nothing to fear. They should have just been happy for all of that information to have been released to the public. I mean, they don't like it when we use their own logic against them. There seems to be a collision of a few different issues coming from different directions that have all converged on banking and cash at the moment. We have, on the one hand, the financial industry wants to be able to make money selling our big data. They want to make money off the transaction fees. They want to be able to have all the complete control over the financial system. Obviously, if they could do away with cash, banks would save an enormous amount of money. They spend a fortune handling cash and transferring cash, and the Reserve Bank printing it and then taking bad notes out of circulation. There's quite a lot of money involved in that that could be saved if they could just get rid of cash. You've also got this argument against crime, but now we've also got this added layer where corporations are increasingly becoming political. And I want to come back to the UKIP founder, whose name has suddenly escaped me.
Nigel
Farage, thank you. Goodness, what a mind blank. And being debanked. Now, he's not the only one. He's since had many hundreds, if not thousands of people reach out to him around the UK and other parts of the world saying, hey, this has also happened to me, and it appears to have been on the basis of my own political leanings. And this is where it gets really dangerous. The elimination of cash might be an inconvenience for those who prefer cash transactions, or for certain kinds of transactions like giving a birthday present to your grandchild or these sorts of things. But when there's an added political layer to that, it really starts to become very, very dangerous. In your case, you were targeted a second time. This starts to raise some real questions about, well, maybe the first time was a mistake, maybe someone was an idiot, maybe someone got it wrong. Why have they done it twice to the same person? Do you have any idea?
Well, I don't have a clear answer to that question yet. However, what you raise is absolutely concerning, because with banks now having total control over your everyday life, if you get debanked, as it's so-called, or your accounts get frozen, then you have been completely ostracized from modern society. You can't pay your bills, you can't eat, you can't travel. That is a severe punishment. In fact, a former parliamentarian reached out to me and said, look, I have been cancelled from all my bank accounts because I received a court-ordered fine, right? And he can't open in any of the big four, which is just a cruel and unusual punishment. He's paid his fine, he's paid his dues, and should rejoin mainstream society. So I think there is a potential, I'm not accusing Westpac of this, but there is a potential that it happened to me again as a sort of form of intimidation, or at least, say, look, some sort of reprisal, or perhaps just some sort of pressure to be like, this can make your life more difficult. Because beyond this, I've put forward a petition that's before the Australian Parliament. Everyone can go sign it. It's an Australian's right to banking services, and it says, look, everybody has a right to a working bank account. Everyone can conduct their financial transactions free of any interruption unless required by law, and everyone can use cash. And so these things are absolutely essential, things that the banks don't want to comply with, and have every reason to try and dissuade.
Well, Crispin, thank you very much for coming on the Aussie Wire and bringing us your story. If anything, your experiences, and like I say, I've been following you on Twitter now for a few weeks, at Crispin Tovere, for those who would like to do the same thing. Your story, if anything, has actually hardened my resolve to really get on board this use cash idea. I'd been, ideologically, I support it, but I really hadn't been accepting of much inconvenience personally in order to actually do it. But seeing what's happened to you right here in Australia with a bank that I have in the past had business with myself, is really kind of lighting a fire under my bum, and I hope a lot of other people will join me in now taking that campaign a lot more seriously and beginning to work a lot more with cash and pushing back against this kind of nonsense. Crispin Tovere, thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Net zero, two simple words that strike fear into the heart of anyone, well, quite frankly, with a brain, who understands the implications of what the pursuit of net zero really means. Well, it seems that more and more people are waking up to the dangers of net zero, and we're seeing across the world, and especially in the UK, some very unexpected things happening. Here to explain it to us is Joanne Nova to tell us, Joanne Nova, why did a little-known place called Uxbridge just become the focal point of this entire net zero debate?
Topher, it's fascinating what's going on in the UK at the moment, and Australians should understand where this is going. We've seen a phase change last month in the UK. I mean, feel the panic. When Boris Johnson quit, his seat was up for re-election, and the Conservatives were widely expected to lose it, and they did, in fact, I think, lose 2 other seats that day. But one young man, Steve Tuckwell, one of the youngest MPs in British Parliament at the moment, managed to pull off a surprising win, and it got attention everywhere. It was almost like the magic key, the kind of sacred, the sacred spell was broken. He dumped his support he didn't mention the Tories. He instead ran almost exclusively against something called ULEZ, which Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has been putting in. Now, ULEZ stands for the Ultra Low Emissions Zone. Sadiq Khan set up the London zone to punish people bringing fossil fuel cars in it's to help encourage EVs. But he was going to expand this to the outer suburbs of London to punish people. And I think it was £12 a day. We're talking about an extraordinary punishment for people who were the truckies, the tradies, the average low-income household. They rely on their old fossil fuel cars. They can't afford a new EV, not like the inner city cafe latte set. So suddenly this became a very live election issue, and this Steve Tuckwell pulled it off. Well, it got the attention all across the UK. They have talked about, in the last weeks, it's been in the news again and again, not just because the Conservatives realised it, and they look like losing the next election. You know, the polling numbers are something like 28% for the Tories and 45% for the Labor Party. So the loss next year in the election in the UK looks complete. But suddenly the Conservatives were thrown a lifeline. And it was like, oh my gosh, the light went off. And they realised that if they run against these low emission zones and these local traffic networks, which I know you want to talk about, Topher, the idea that putting bollards is going to somehow be a winner in our lives and stop us using the road, that it might be a winner. What do you know? Who would have thought that people really like their cars?
Well, who would have thought that people want the government to serve them and not the other way around? We want the government to provide us with basic services and make our lives easier and not harder. Net zero is one example of that, but you just mentioned that these local traffic networks, these low traffic neighbourhoods, the same acronym is used for different expressions, are quite a fascinating thing. I've just got an article here saying that Mark Harper calls for a review of the unpopular LTN, low traffic neighbourhood zones. This is quite an extraordinary turnaround, exactly in the same way as what you're talking about with net zero. And it's come off the back of this Oxford University 15-minute city trial. And I've got some video here. I just want to stop and play this. This is the reality of what's been happening in parts of Oxford with this trial.
In the dead of night, a hooded figure removes a base plate for a bollard, then pours cement into the hole. The aim, to make it hard to install a new one. This footage, obtained exclusively by ITV Meridian, is one of hundreds of incidents of vandalism in Oxford's local traffic neighbourhoods.
Now, I love that they call it vandalism to be removing the bollards and to be trying to stop them from being able to be reinstalled. I would argue that it's vandalism to be taking roads that were open and paid for by the public and then spending public money to close them down. What does this say about what's happening and the public mood, I guess, towards all of these different emissions reductions ideas?
Well, this is it, Topher. The bizarre idea that, you know, after building all these roads so that people could conveniently go to A to B, that people in these kind of councils, especially Oxford Council and others, thought this idea of a 15-minute city was a winner. Instead of offering people better cycle paths or easier public transport or ways to get from A to B, they thought, look, won't it be a good idea if we just stick bollards in everywhere and stop people driving from A to B? They'll have to walk and they'll thank us for it.
Yeah.
Well, it's just bizarre because, of course, people hate it. It's killing businesses in some roads where traffic now can't travel past them. People don't want to walk 15 minutes in the rain to pick up their kids from school or visit the doctor, and they want to be able to drive their cars. And the weird thing is, this is something no one's talking about. If you have to drive out to a ring road, go on a highway and come back into a different 15-minute city, it's going to produce more emissions and take a lot longer and put more cars on the road. And the bizarre thing is none of the Greens care. You know, does it matter if we produce more CO2? Whatever. It's
What I'm
the whole
loving
thing is so bizarre. And yes, people hate these bollards, and it's having all kinds of perverse effects, Topher. Things like there are little neighbourhoods now where plumbers don't want to go and they're charging extra to go in there, and electricians, because for them it takes a lot longer to get in and to get out. All the roads are now one way. They can't go here, they can't go there. And so it's costing people who live in these zones more time to get anywhere and more money to bring in a tradesman.
But what I'm absolutely loving is that in a very, very strange way, they've actually really brought people together. We've just been watching some footage there of there's someone who's gotten out of the car to help the driver get over the bollard. We saw earlier a pedestrian literally just volunteer to actually just hold that bollard down so that a car could get over it. They weren't even involved with the car at all. They just stopped for a moment as they were on the road walking. In a very perverse way, these ideas have become so bad that complete strangers are now cooperating and working with each other to undermine these ideas and to thwart the objectives of their own local council. This cuts back to what we were saying about net zero. The council and the government at all levels serving the people and the people's wishes. But now it seems as though they seem to believe that they're the boss and that we should just do what we're told.
Indeed, the cult of climate change has had no pushback. So they've come up with crazy ideas, mad ideas that depend on the public having no choice. In other words, the uni party voting left or right, you get the same thing either way. And it looks like this may have broken in the UK. Now, my big fear of this is, as we know in Australia, that can easily go underground. I mean, after Tony Abbott won his 90-seat landslide win based on Axe the carbon tax, we ended up with an emissions trading scheme in Australia because, you know, Malcolm Turnbull came in and secretly brought in the safeguard mechanism. So what we saw was governments bringing in the laws that people voted against, like net zero itself, and conservative governments doing it. But in the UK, it's really quite a seismic shock that's gone on. And, you know, to give you an idea of just how big this is, former Labor Party leader Tony Blair has come out warning the Labor, the current Keith Starmer and others, that perhaps they should back off just a little bit. Keith Starmer, the Labor opposition, even warned Sadiq Khan, the mayor, that maybe he should tread a little gently. And so the Labor Party is very quickly saying that if the Liberals, if the Tories run against them based on net zero policies, they're so unpopular that the Tories might even pull off a win in the next election. And that's becoming part of the national discussion in the UK, is that the Conservatives might not lose the next election if they pick this topic up. And of course, this is like a sacred talisman just busted. And so it's very interesting to see what happens and whether the powers that be can bury this argument somehow and stop it being an election issue. And I don't think they can, because the big fear in the UK, because they have first past the post voting, unlike us, which, you know, with our preferential system here, which normally I love. But what we're seeing in the UK is the big fear of both the Labor and the Tories is that their members will personally say, hey, I've got to save my own seat. I'm going to dump the policies of my main party and run against them. And we saw that in a couple of councils in the UK as well, where Labor members have split from their own party. So this is from the left. They've split from their own party, running against these things in order to maintain their own seat. And of course, once you split the vote in the UK, you're guaranteed to lose because the first past the post system makes that happen. And we saw how much Nigel Farage achieved with his Brexit party, even though they didn't win many seats. So it is a different situation to Australia, but fascinating to watch.
Look, it's quite an incredible moment in political history. We've seen West Australian politics completely turned on its head in the space of 2 months, thanks to the Aboriginal heritage laws that were a complete disaster, and now they've promised they're going to walk those back. We're watching Victorian politics be thrown into turmoil again because of Aboriginal heritage laws. I suspect that the Voice proposal, the Voice referendum, is going to prove to be a long-term disaster for the proponents of it, and may well mark a turning point in Australian federal politics there. We may be looking at a turning point in UK politics. You've come on the Aussie Wire before and talked about how attitudes towards energy supply and even towards CO2 are changing throughout Europe. We might be watching before our very eyes an incredible turning point, one that I know you've been looking forward to for over 15 years of incredibly hard work on your blog, Joanne Nova. And
it is an extraordinary point, Topher. And just to finish up there, I think the most important thing here is that people are unaware of the costs that are involved with net zero. And once those costs come to the fore, like in the case of the UK with these traffic bollards with £12 costs of running a fossil fuel car, suddenly people are awake to the hidden cost of these policies. And that's got to be the thing that we push forward so that people become aware of just how expensive it is to change the global climate. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought, indeed. Well, Joanne Nova, thank you so much for joining us once again on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Aussie Wire News. Don't forget, today I had the absolute privilege and pleasure of announcing the away team, the on-the-ground team that is going to be covering the launch of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship in London in late October and early November. We're going to bring you inside access. We're the only Australian media with invited inside access into that event, and we are going to bring you absolutely everything. I've got an incredible team here. This is Carly. I'm Topher, of course. We have the empty chair representing Rukshan, who's currently in New Zealand with Avi Yemeni and his book launch. And we have Rebekah, Barnett. The links to all of their socials are going to be in the description of this video. Now, we release new episodes of the Aussie Wire News every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes by going to theaussiewire.com. Make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms. That's going to be especially important with the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship launch. We're going to be giving you lots of different content across all the different platforms, so follow us on all of them. Go to theaussiewire.com, sign up for our email list so we can stay in touch with you no matter what the big tech companies may decide to do. Remember to become an insider if you want that exclusive access, exclusive content, giveaways, discounts, and so much more. The link to do that is also in the description. My name's Topher Field, and thank you so much for watching another episode of the Aussie Wire News.